So you've got, sort of those two-dimensional ones, that particle systems that live under effects. Grab that. Simulation. Any of those are useful. Particle world, though, is one of the more versatile ones. There really isn't anything you can't do with that, and actually it duplicates the effects of some of the other two-dimensional ones, just in more of a three-dimensional kind of a way. So that's the one we'll probably look at more than the rest. And I figured that doing this today made the most sense because I've, some of the write-ups talked about doing, leaves falling through, flowers, that kind of petals, that kind of thing, maybe dust. So this would be a worthwhile kind of a thing to talk about. So all of these simulations or particle systems live under the effect menu under simulation. And you can also find them over, you can also go to this effects panel and type in what you're looking for as well. And it'll give you all the appropriate ones. So the first thing about particle systems is they don't live by themselves without something to work, enact, or something to work on. So you've got to have a shape of some kind in your timeline. So if I create, well, going back to the particle world simulator real quick, it'll allow you to create your own visuals and set those up in any way, shape, or form that you need to. So we'll kind of look at a lot of these. This one I set up with a couple layers of it, so that, and with a 3D camera, so I could get some passing in front of objects, others passing behind objects. But some very exaggerated differences in size and whatnot as well. So we'll take a look at a lot of those things. So if okay, so I've got a new comp. Like I said, all particle systems need to enact upon some shape. So I'll just draw, and it doesn't matter what color it is or anything else for the most part. The 2D ones do because they lay on top of the object, but particle world itself actually kind of replaces the object. So set up, an object, and if we just take a look at a few of these, this selected, effect simulation, maybe we'll take a look at bubbles, for instance. And I think we looked at this one before maybe, and by default, they've got kind of a erratic movement. They're not really very bubbly. I am going to toss another solid behind this so maybe we can see these a little better. There we go. Only because the inner color is darker. So from our shape layer, which we'll name, again, this is a very two-dimensional kind of effect. This is kind of what you get, but we've got a lot of different settings we can use. So within all of our settings, we can vary the number of bubbles, the speed they move at, the amount that they move back and forth, that's the wobble amplitude, frequency, size, reflection type, that kind of stuff. So it's, by default, these fade inward. We could do them as a fade outward. They end up with a little bit more of a dusty kind of floaty effect, and we'll do that one. And then right now it does 100, it's got 150. If we crank those up, that just adds a lot to the mix. The speed, 1.0. The best way to get used to the speeds and some of these values is just to sort of crank them up, crank them down, see what you end up with. And really, by themselves, they're kind of static. They don't do a whole lot. It's when you start kind of adjusting the different things that you start getting some more, little more interesting things. So, I said, messing with them, trying them out is the best way to kind of figure out what they do. We can utilize our blending modes with these, if I get this right. If I duplicate this, maybe I make the bubble size here smaller. And let's see. Maybe I track mat it to the bottom one. They're a little smaller. We can get some kind of different things that happen as we apply different blending modes to these as well. So in this particular case, we kind of mask one to the other and sort of playing around with them a little bit is kind of the best way to figure out what you can do. It's kind of the value of this is, and these are just sort of what I always talk about with motion tests. I've got this bubbly kind of a thing. I'm going to try some different stuff until you find something that's really kind of intriguing and works. None of these right out of the box do a whole lot by themselves. They're not the most attractive. What matters is what you decide to do with them. So if we lower the amount, we can get them to kind of interact a little bit more. So even the most mundane tools, like this one, depending upon, trial and error, working through things, I mean, I really can't stress enough that just playing around with a lot of the settings, playing around with the interactions, mask one to the other and set different blending modes will get you different looks that you can't get right out of the box. And when you find one you like, save it. Save that, keep that composition, name it. I mean, put a note in the file as to what it is. And kind of keep a file of those kinds of things, because those are the kinds of things that make the process down the road a little bit easier. If you've got something you've already figured out, you don't have to remember it. You can kind of go back and find that approach. So bubbles is fairly simple. I think we had looked at that, like I said before, whenever we looked at whenever we were doing the Halloween sprites. But creatively mixing these things together is the best way to get decent results out of them. So if I go back to my project, sort of name that comp, put it away. So we can time a lot of these out as well. So this particular object is using the shatter effector. And if we take a look at what we've got here, we can use it to kind of dimensionally shatter stuff on screen. You want to break a mirror or something to that effect. That's a decent, easy way to do it. It's very controllable. You can time that out however you need to. And it's a fairly simple effector to work with. So we create another comp, and start with just a background. I'm going to add to it a gradient ramp. Make it radial. So the start of the ramp. An awful lot of these tools have location pickers, so I can make the start of my color ramp down here at the middle of my object, and set the end of my color ramp say out here. That. And then we'll just place an object in the middle there. Center. And to that, this particular simulation will affect the actual object. So we'll grab shatter. And shatter by itself has a bunch of different settings. It defaults to kind of a brick setting and does the entire scene, but the difference here is changing the view, which if we set that to rendered, it'll retain our object. And then we can shatter that from there. And shatter will give some dimensionality to it. but maybe that's not the shape we want those to have. See how it gives us sort of a three dimensions. So we can modify that. So if I just sort of pull this out, if we modify this, we can change it from bricks to any number of other things. Glass is what I'd used before. So that gives more triangular kinds of shapes. And it's shattering it from the middle, which we can change. And we can also make it's kind of big, and the pieces are kind of big right now, so we can change, let's see, the repetitions is set to 10. We open that up, we can increase that, so we've got a lot more shatterized parts. And by itself, it just kind of starts at the beginning of the timeline. So the way we modify that or affect it is, I'll just close up shape for now. If I go to force 1, I can change the position of the shatter. So for right now, it's starting right at the middle. So if I click on the crosshairs for pattern, for position, I can come up here and place it on this corner of the object. And now, that, and then change the depth and whatnot. So we can change the forces, the physics on it, basically the tumble axis. So right now they're set to free. The randomness of them. We crank that way up. Crank it way down. Behave differently. Viscosity. Is sort of refers more to the environment that it's in, and raising that viscosity level will make it behave differently. You can see even with set at half size and half resolution, these shadow effects take up a lot of RAM, a lot of memory to kind of render. Change your lighting. You get a lot of different controls over these. So if I want it to be a point source, I can set my light position. So we can do, more of that sort of thing. This one's just set up. It's glass, rendered all. And then it's this radius that kind of controls the shatter itself. So if I don't want so by default it starts at the first frame, but if I set the radius to 0 and set a keyframe for it, and then come out here and set the radius to something higher, I now have keyframes that I can adjust. So if I go in here into my effect, I can grab these keyframes, move them out, say to 2 seconds, stretch my timeline out. And as I play it, my shatter effect won't start until that 2-second mark. So I can control when that happens, which gives me time to animate other objects on my screen to interact with it. So there's my shatter point that I'd set up. Maybe I'll go back into my shape and change the number of repetitions, raise those back up. I'm going to drop my viscosity down, which is under physics. And since I know that that's where my shatter is going to happen, I can draw another object on my screen. Something smaller. And set my center point. And then at this point in time, actually, maybe right there, I'll come in and set this just inside. And then we'll come back here a few frames. Let's see, set that just inside. Set our position keyframe on that. Come back here a little bit. Pull that off screen. So when it comes in, we hit it. Actually, maybe right there it needs to be a little deeper in, maybe. And then take that, pull them down. So I could adjust the timing on that and make it a little more obvious, but you get the idea. So within that mirror, it's just adjusting using these forces settings to set the radius on that shatter, 0 to start, and whatever value you need to get all your parts off screen. And then you can adjust the timing on all of that. It gives you a lot more control than there. So the best way is just to kind of play around with those, figure them out, but you can get some decent 3D looking effects by modifying what you see on screen. So the one that's sort of After Effects flagship particle system, though, is Particle World, which need to draw out a shape and go under Effects, Simulation, Particle World, and it creates kind of a 3D space. By default, it does this kind of sparky kind of a thing, which isn't really very attractive. But we have a lot of control over this, which is nice. So if we go up here under the Particle World settings, the major components of Particle World are, you've got the particle itself, its birth rate and its longevity. So the birth rate refers to how many particles are generated a second. The longevity refers to how long they exist on screen. So this is generating 2 particles. Actually, it's not even a second. It's a fraction of time less, but generates 2 particles, and its longevity is only a second. So it's generating continuously. And what you see with the color difference here, yellow to orange, is yellow is the birth color, orange is the death color. So you can use those colors to your benefit, and you can control those. You've got total control over them. So by itself, it doesn't do a whole lot. So we've got our birth rate and our longevity. We've got our producer. The producer is the shape or the object that actually emits the particles, which is basically this point right here. And if I stop it, it's the center of the screen. So the producer is the point at which the particles emanate from. And right now, they're emanating from a singular point that is only 0.25 units large. And we can change that. So producer is where they emit from. The physics, velocity, gravity, resistance, those are all the external forces that act on them, which you can control. And then there's the particle themselves, which have different shapes. And we'll kind of go through those as we go. So the particle type by default is line, and there's a bunch of different options here. You can change them to a star, a shaded sphere, faded. The line itself doesn't do a whole lot for us, but some of these others may. And the one that really does more for us is this textured tri and textured quad polygon, because that allows us to customize the particle, so we can create our own object. Uses part of the particle system. So we'll just do something simple like stars for the moment, just to kind of show what we've got. And I'm going to start with the particle and modify it. So, our birth rate and our longevity are up here, but we can control the birth size and the death size down here. So maybe we want them to be born large, and whenever they die, disappear to almost nothing. Or we might want to do just exactly the opposite. Born tiny and die larger. Which gives you sort of a growing out from a point. And again, the yellow is the birth color, the orange is the death color. So birth size, death size, the size variation, if I crank that up, we'll have more variety in size. And our opacity, we'll crank up to 100, just so we know what we've got. Our producer, which is where everything starts from. So we can move this around. And maybe I'll move the Y position up some and to the right or left. We can move that around. But even more so than that, actually I want to move X back to where it was. We can change the shape of that. So I'm going to come back to 0, and I can control this from here. So if I stretch this out, it'll emanate from a much broader position. And then I can go ahead and position this up off the screen as well, so that I have nothing, but they kind of come in from the top. And let's change that to something. Do a faded sphere. So I get much more of a rainfall kind of effect, or a falling from above kind of effect. If I want to change the amount of time they live on screen, I'll change my longevity from a second, crank it up, say to 3 or 4. You'll see that the color stays yellow on screen for longer. You really don't get that orange coming into play. So I've got kind of that. And then if I go back under my physics, there's a variety of settings there. So explosive is the default. I can set twirl, which gives more of a swirly kind of effect. Has a little bit more of a snow kind of feel to it, I think. Twirly is a little faster version of that. And let's see, somewhere here, I can change my birth color to more of a white. Match those. My physics, velocity, I can turn that down. That'll slow. Gravity, half is the default. If I raise that, it'll pull them out faster. And if I lower it below 0.5, they fall slower, which, because they're falling slower, they're maintaining their time on screen longer. Maybe we drop our depth size to 0.8. Makes it a little less. As we start to slow them down, we get some, we get some better kinds of effects and kinds of looks. So if we take a look at under particle, the size variation, I'm going to crank up a little higher so that they're a little more different. I can raise my birth size up a little bit. You see these kind of render slower. We start to get some things that are kind of interesting. We can, we've got all sorts of different physics settings, velocity. If we animate the producer to move from left to right, the velocity of that will affect it. So I could go back up here to my producer. So let's make this a little more. Let's do that, bring him down. So if we do that, that changes our look overall. I could change the X position to there, and then slide it across the screen. You'll see that when I do that, as that producer starts moving, it trails those particles behind them. So theoretically, that becomes exhaust smoke or any number of things you might want to do. We can also adjust our physics and our gravity to 0 so that gravity doesn't affect it at all. And it'll sort of build and then trail along behind it. So we start getting quite a bit of control. Maybe at this point we actually pull that producer all the way off. And this is where inherent velocity kind of comes into play. Many of the effects are based upon other effects. It's just kind of playing around with them. So I can take, I'll take that. Actually, we'll go back here, delete that, pull our X position back across, raise our Y position, and start these off screen. Gravity 0.3. 0.15. So our physics have an awful lot to do with what we have happen. If we kind of reach a point to where we want, resistance will slow things down even more. There's so many different options and so many different things we can do with them. Let's undo that. So we can also, if I go back down here to my particle type, I've got a graphic that I brought in, created out of Illustrator. And if I go back over to my particle system, change faded sphere off to textured quadgon or polygon or trigon, it gives me another option here, texture. If I open that up, and let's close this up, and let's pull our petal down into our scene, hide it. Now I can use that petal graphic as my particle element. Set that up. Remember that, the tools themselves do what they do. And you can find any number of tutorials online that'll even take you further into depth with what I'm doing here. But, it's how you use all the tools together and get creative with them that really kind of makes a lot of these things come to life. So, for instance, and rather than take the time to set that up entirely, what I just did there, I took and with some fine tuning, is this it? With some fine tuning, I can kind of create a very subtle kind of an effect. And with this, I actually layered a couple of different particle systems, created one, duplicated it, and set it up as a 3D object so that I get, somewhere in here, we'll get a larger one that passes a lot closer to the lens. And I've got them fading out to nothing just to give them sort of that airy, dreamy effect. But they're also rotating. If I go back into my effects panel, my particle, I can set a rotation speed for it so they kind of spin. Actually, maybe I didn't save this before. But I also set up a 3D camera with this. So create two shapes that have particles on them, plus the sphere. And if I take a look at my four views, I've got my first particle system, my circle, let's see, no, that's my shape. So here's my first particle system and my second particle system. If I take this shape, I'm going to slide it back here a little bit. With that 3D camera, I should be able to get objects, petals floating in front and floating behind. And by adjusting these panels in 3D space, I can also affect the perceived size of a lot of these. this is a slow moving one, so it takes a little bit to sort of unfold, but so, play around with a lot of those. The particle systems also take a little bit of time to ramp up, so that if that's what you want to do, what makes sense is to create a composition with your particle system in it, because like I said, it takes time to ramp up. Maybe you actually want your animation to start when it looks like this. You don't want to wait on that time for things to kind of ramp up. You can save that, and this particular composition is, how long is that? 59 seconds. So if I create a new composition, add only 10, I can drop this in there, and rather than waiting on that to ramp up, I can slide that object back in my timeline so that when my animation starts, they're already well underway. So, create a longer, for a particle system, create a longer section than you need, but place them into your final composition, because you can adjust where those start, and maybe there's a segment of it that just looks better than another. You can kind of slide those around until you find them. But by working with these different settings, grab that shape, particles physics, the producer longevity, we can slow these down, change the motion of them and the movement, and get some kind of refined effects. If you can imagine it, you can do it. You just got to spend a bit of time with them and work with them. Like everything else, though, these are all just tools, and they're designed to kind of work with other items. Although you can use them by themselves, you get the best results when you combine them with other stuff. All of our effects are stackable. And all of our concepts are concepts of masking, different things like that, where white is opaque and black is transparent, still apply. So I can create a particle system let's see. That's not what I wanted. Is this the one? Or, oh no, it's in a different file. Hold. Here we go. Sure. All right. Here we go. So we can create these particle systems and use them as a mask that slowly reveals an image or a scene. It's kind of a creative effect. Didn't use particles in the way that they're intended to be used by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the things that I decided to use them with that kind of make the difference. can do the same thing here. Using the bubbles, I can reveal my image. Maybe you want a motion graphic that the edges are never really the same. They kind of disappear. This would be a way of, rather than just, we looked at some kind of complicated setups with fractals. You could do the same sort of thing with a fractal, but a particle system with zero gravity starts small, dies large, dies transparent, gives us a far different effect than anything that I started with. I think that's the biggest thing that I find with most things is that, software are just tools. All these things are just tools. It's what you decide to do with them. You don't build a house with just a hammer. You build a house with a variety of tools. So, when you need to come up with a creative mask of some kind, remember that anything that creates a black and white object or a black and white element can be used as an alpha mask or a luma mask. All the settings that these things have give you a whole lot of possibilities. So if we want, let's see, let's take a look at, take a look at snowfall. I haven't really used that one before. So if I set that up, I get something very small and very subtle. Let's see, let's increase the size. See what that does for us. Scene depth, we can increase the speed. Its opacity is low, so if I crank that up, we'll get something a little darker. Wind. This isn't getting me what I want, but that's all right. This doesn't get us what I want. I'll try something else. Spread, wind. Yeah. When I place those on a blue object, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. So if I place them on black, because maybe I want this to be in front of something else, I could theoretically create that black and white as an alpha mask, place a white solid on top of it, let's see. See what composite does. white rectangle on top of it. Maybe I set snowflakes as a mask. So I kind of have the same effect. But then let's do this. Make it red. Pull it to the bottom behind all of these. And now I can create, using that particle system, kind of create that snow that sort of falls in front of different objects on my screen. With just a blue shape, placing the snow on top of it, I can't get this effect. So I got to be a little creative to kind of figure out what will get me the result I want. And that really wasn't the result I wanted at all. But that's okay. Create a new comp. And this. Yeah. Maybe this time we'll try rainfall. These are really subtle effects, and you really got to kind of mess around with them to get something you can see. So, and I could use the same technique I just used to mask that and move it in front of other objects, but maybe this spread. I'm really looking for something that'll allow me to turn it sideways and give me sort of a sideways movement. I wonder if that is really just as simple as, no it is not. It's always want to go top to bottom. Okay. So that's going to go left to right. Variation in my wind. My speed, slow that down. Not really give me what I want either. Some of them are very similar. Drizzle, rainfall are like practically the same thing, but I won't go through all those. So maybe particle world is still my better option to try to get something that goes left to right. Delete rainfall. Anyway, that is a lot of times what it's about, getting something to run left to right, or look it up. Like I said, there's plenty of tutorials that go through how particle systems work that you can look at, that go into all the different settings in a lot more depth than I did. But there's really kind of only so much time, and I just wanted to give you more of a flavor of the types of things you can do. I mean, one thing is those tutorials don't really. They'll show you how to use stuff, but they'll show you how the tools work, but it's putting them together with other concepts that get you different results. So, which is a lot of times one of the tougher things to do when you're learning something, or you're not familiar with something. You're more concerned about, how does this work? What do these different settings do? Playing around with them is really just the best way to kind of figure that out. And I know there's a setting in here somewhere that'll let me go left to right, but usually when I do particle systems, I do them within something like Cinema 4D or something like that, import them into After Effects and composite them that way. But I would think extra angle. Some things don't always do all the things you want them to do. So play around with those a little bit. I mean, the effects could be kind of nice. You gotta be willing just to sit and tinker with them, to be quite honest. I mean, there's so many things within all of these that really just require that. It's by playing around with them that you get better, that you start getting interesting results. All the things I'm doing here are the equivalent of motion tests that I'm always telling you to do. So if I set that to 0, and a little bit of resistance. All right. So have a good Thanksgiving. Like I said, storyboards for Monday when we come back. The tech there is going to be sort of green screening and motion tracking. I'm going to vary from what he's got, though. I feel like there are more practical applications by and large. So we'll look at basic green screening techniques, but motion tracking, if you've got types of things I'll look at there probably are, if you've got an animation of a mobile device, how something animates, placing an actual video of somebody holding it, tracking it to the device so that it looks like it's actually in place. Same thing happens with posters on a street, on a wall, as you're walking past them. You'll taking your own graphics, putting them in place so that they're part of the scene, that sort of thing. So that's what we'll look at on Monday. And that and your storyboards. So have a good Thanksgiving.